Happy Sunday! Welcome to the Science Behind with Harper Crevitz. This episode is the science behind night owls. Sorry I had to postpone last week. I know you all missed me. I'm working on various series under marine biology, environmental science, and brain science and psychology, which is our current series. In this episode, I'm going to cover what characterizes a night owl, how that changes over time, and our biggest question, per usual, why? We're also going to reference a little bit of biology and DNA. So let's get into it. So, being a night owl, or a person who stays up super late, is somewhat of a characteristic. Some people have it and some people don't. So, what makes up a night owl, and how are they different from people who fall asleep the minute their head hits the pillow? Which is me. Night owls surround the idea of the internal clock, which we're also going to reference throughout this episode as circadian rhythm. We all have it. It tells us when to eat breakfast, lunch, and dinner, as well as to fall asleep and wake up. So you can see how it's connected to this night owl episode. Your body has a sort of clock pertaining to the hours of the day. However, this is where it gets interesting. Night owls tend to have a clock that isn't exactly correct. Now, it doesn't mean they're broken, they just simply have longer days. So instead of 24 hours, it looks more like 24.2 or 24.5. I gotta warn you, mind-blowing information coming. The trait of being a night owl is largely genetic, and this is where we get into genes and biology just a little bit. In your genes are sequences of DNA. That comes from both parents, so your eye color can come from your dad and your hair from your mom. Now, we could have a whole episode on DNA and the process of making it, but that's for another time. All you need to know, my friends, is that some variations of genes with super fancy names like PER3 and clock influence a lot of things in your body that cause you to stay up late. PER3 gene variants are associated with depicting morning versus evening, and clock gene affects your circadian timing. So studies actually show that the 24-hour clock seems to be 40 to 50% heritable. So if your parents are night owls, congratulations, you probably are too. Some of those things that gene variants can control are melatonin. Lots of people take melatonin to fall asleep at night, and it works wonders, if I do say so myself. The gene can change when that melatonin rises, so night owls go longer without feeling quite as tired yet. It also determines when your body temperature drops and a bunch of other things that are kind of boring, but body temperature is not one of those boring things. Body temperature naturally drops before sleep, and night owls will experience this drop later. This involves cortisol, essentially the wake-up hormone. Cortisol spikes later in night owls, so they aren't lazy, it's just biology. Some scientists actually suggest that in early human groups, it was beneficial for not everybody to sleep at the same time because if they were naturally alert, they'd be able to watch out for predators, tend to fires, and protect the group, which is a really interesting theory to think about, that night owls can actually come from our earlier evolution and ways of life. Okay, Harper, what the heck? Are you sneaking in another segment? Because last time I checked, this was brain science and psychology. Now, yes, I'm about to get there. Remember our friend dopamine that we're super accompanied with? Well, he's back. Night owls show higher dopamine in the evening, which means more alert, motivation, and an understanding of really what's going on at 1 in the morning. Put simply, night owls' brains don't shift into shutdown mode like us regular people at 10 p.m. They last much longer before that point. But what about with kids? I mean, we could last forever without feeling the need to go to bed, and all through that classic fit, "Mom, I'm not tired yet," or "1 more minute." The answer is largely hormonal. So teenagers naturally produce melatonin later in the evening. Wait, let's pause, because that sounds exactly like night owls, and you would be correct. There's also a biological shift delay, where your circadian rhythm changes, meaning they don't feel sleepy until later at night. The circadian rhythm is that 24-hour clock we talked about earlier, but it has a lot more brain science behind it than I originally let on. So the circadian rhythm involves a new system we haven't talked about yet, called the SCN, or in super fancy terms, the suprachiasmatic nucleus, and is a very tiny structure located in the front of the hypothalamus in the limbic system, which you might remember from last week's episode. So, the SCN creates this 24-hour body clock using light input from the eyes. The SCN is located super specifically, so it can receive direct light information from the retina, which is a part of your eye. Now, how do they connect? That's through neuron signals. They pass between the eye to the SCN and adjust the body's internal clock to match up with the time of day. So, how can you change your circadian rhythm? The rhythm connects with light recognition to work, like I said, passing from your SCN to your eye. So, a shift in work, spending excess amount of time on screens, irregular sleep schedules, or jet lag, really anything that has to do with shifting exposure from light to dark is going to change your circadian rhythm. So, if you're a night owl who needs to wake up early, you could have more morning light exposure, invest in a consistent sleep schedule, start dimming the lights a few hours before bed, avoid caffeine, and try to gradually shift into another clock pattern. This all connects back to that SCN and light input. So, let's expand on that biological clock. Michael Bruce is a clinical psychologist and a sleep specialist, often called the sleep doctor. He helped popularize the idea that instead of just morning people and night owls, we actually fall into 4 chronotype categories. So, chronotype just means your biological timing pattern. So, instead of labeling people as lazy or productive, Bruce came up with this new idea to frame it around natural rhythms and patterns. Now, here is where things get fun. Bruce uses animals to characterize the 4 chronotypes. Listen in and tell me which one sounds like you the most. When do you feel the most clear-headed? 7 a.m., 2 p.m., 10 p.m.? For me, I think it's around 10 a.m. That's your chronotype talking, so listen up, answer the poll attached to this episode. The lion is the early bird. Naturally waking up early, is more productive early on, and crashes mid-afternoon, and is often schedule-oriented. Essentially, these are the 5 a.m. gym people who have already answered 12 emails by 8 in the morning. Next, we have the bear, which turns out to be the majority of people, from about 50 to 55%. These people often wake up with sunlight, their energy peaks mid-morning, and they sleep at around 10 or 11 p.m. This schedule is exactly how society is built around, which we're going to talk about in another segment. Examples of this are going to school, having a 9-to-5 job, or standard work hours. The wolf is our beloved night owl. These people have a hard time waking up early, their energy peaks in the late afternoon or evening, they're more alert at night, and they reach a second wind from 9 to 11 p.m. Bruce says wolves can often struggle with traditional school schedules or experience a sort of social jet lag, and he makes a big point to say these people aren't lazy, they're just biologically delayed, which is a big theme of our episode. Finally, we have the dolphin, who is the light sleeper. This is actually inspired by dolphins, who sleep with one half of their brain awake at a time. These people are often prone to insomnia, sensitive to noise and light, and it ties into our psychology angle, using that recognition of light. So, night owls aren't random. They're what Bruce calls wolves. People whose internal clocks are shifted later. Their melatonin rises later, their body temperature drops later, and their dopamine spikes later. Bruce argues that productivity isn't about actually working harder. In fact, it's about working the right time for your brain, whether you're an early bird, 9-to-5 worker, night owl, or light sleeper. For the next week, track when you naturally feel tired without alarms. That's your chronotype trying to tell you something. Now, let's connect all of our ideas into an even bigger one. To recap, night owls produce melatonin later, have a longer circadian cycle, feel more alert at night, and experience their temperature drop later. Here is where we hit a huge societal problem. The world literally does not care. School starts at 8 a.m., work starts around the same time, meetings happen, and buses often come before sunrise. Society is built for bears and lions, not wolves. Let's reference that social jet lag concept I briefly mentioned. Social jet lag is where your biological clock and social obligations don't match up. It's like flying from New York to California every weekend without ever getting on a plane. Night owls struggle to fall asleep early, have to wake up early anyways, and accumulate essentially sleep debt during the week because of this, causing them to catch up on the weekends. This constant shifting confuses the SCN, disrupts hormone timing, and increases stress. Let's provide an example, zeroing in on teens versus school start times. So, teenagers naturally experience that biological shift during puberty, like we mentioned, where melatonin rises later, the circadian rhythm also shifts later. So, they're wired to fall asleep around 11 or 12 when school starts at 8 a.m. Chronic sleep deprivation in teens is linked to lower academic performance, increased anxiety, high risk taking, etc. We all don't feel good when we haven't slept well. So when your kid says, "Mom, I'm tired," they might not be being dramatic. They're literally not ready for sleep. Well, that's all for this week's episode. Thank you for listening to The Science Behind with me, Harper Crefitz. Please reach out to thesciencebehind.media@gmail.com or comment with any suggestions for future episodes or questions you may have. And answer that poll attached to the episode with which chronotype you are. See you next Sunday where we make science make sense.